On today's show, how basic asset protection can change your business consulting image. Part 2 of this week's series on business asset protection with author and attorney Ike Devji. Hi everyone, I'm Steve Savant, syndicated financial columnist and contributing author to Backroom Technician. Let's get down to business. Well, welcome to the show, day 2, Ike.
Thank you, Steve.
Well, we're talking about basic issues, and I think some of the basic issues, especially the stuff that's been in the news lately, these 2 children that were in a coma and they were just doing regular dental exams, and we have now healthcare directives and people are in conflict on this. I think I want to talk to you about this because every time we mention this out on online, we get a lot of traffic off it. Tell me, how important is healthcare directives today, especially with the technology in medicine?
I think it's very important. I mean, there are a lot of different issues that come into play. And obviously, the first and foremost things on the mind of at least attorneys is trying to add some surety and some direction to something that is uncertain, that is scary, that is stressful. So dealing with a relative that is sick or in a coma or has some critical issue is traumatic enough without adding the legal issues to it. From a more black and white and objective perspective, it's very important in things like controlling costs and legal exposures. There's a case right now in Texas, they're torn right from today's headlines just in the last few days, where there is a lady who is brain dead, who was without oxygen for up to an hour to her brain, who is now on life support, and the state of Texas is not allowing her to be taken off life support because she has a child that was also without oxygen for an hour. Now imagine the trauma that family's facing, and imagine how directives could help not only the family, but the courts, which are now involved, and the hospital itself control that treatment in the future. And who's going to be responsible for those expenses?
I think this is a great place for financial advisors to partner with attorneys that play in this realm to really cover this off. If you're going to be the quarterback of your client's concern or the CFO of your client, this is one of those things that you need to start to import into your practice so that you can at least bring it up. I'm not saying you're writing the documents. I'm not saying you're doing any of that.
No, certainly
but you're
not.
Bringing the people to the table, the proper attorneys to the table, to cover this issue off. It's a heartbreaking issue. The story you just said is a heartbreaker. I want to talk a little bit about, probably right next to healthcare directives, what about child custody for minors? I mean, every time I've been involved in the last 30 years in an estate plan where we have grandchildren, mostly in the ones I do, there is this, that when this comes up, everybody goes quiet.
It's an exceptionally important issue. And, you know, as you said, having a list and going down and having the advisors that you and I both work with integrate these discussions is important. And yes, I agree with you that you can't be responsible as a financial advisor for executing an estate plan, or you shouldn't be.
Right.
But I'm sure there are a few out there that are doing it. But you certainly can have a checklist. Just as I don't sell life insurance or disability insurance or long-term care insurance or any of the specialty kinds of P&C that we're going to talk about, I sure have a list, and we need to make sure that that list has at least been addressed. Now, when it comes to custody issues, that is something that I'm continually surprised by how many people don't have good planning for. And the question really is, if something happened to you and your spouse, does the world know, and will it be validly recognized in the eyes of the court system as to who you want to have control and custody of your children? And I am surprised at how many cases by people who don't have someone, or who have not made that plan, or who have done planning like a simple will that may not address that issue of guardianship. And when we ask people to think about this proactively, we know that it's an unpleasant thing to think, my God, if something happened to myself and my wife, where would my children go, for instance? Nobody wants to think about that. But it's part of your responsibility, just like figuring out who's picking them up from school or from soccer practice on a given day. And think about this. Think about how difficult it is for many parents to even find someone to take care of their kids for a night or a weekend so mom and dad can get away. Who are you going to leave that responsibility of taking care of those kids for up to the next 18 years with? So it's exceptionally important. It's also important to have people that you trust who can administer the bounty and the wealth that you might be leaving behind. And that doesn't always need to be the same person.
Well, yeah, because you have a person that's probably good in child care that you feel good about, but then maybe they're not good money managers.
That sometimes it's the same person, sometimes it's not. And we do realize that, and that's one of the things that needs to be accounted for in a professionally drafted estate plan. And we look at this as risk management for the children, just like all the other types of risk management that you and I are talking about.
Well, I like this because this is a great strategy to bring in a very, very top-end topic, if it's something that we really need to address. And I cannot tell you how many times we've sat down and said, well, maybe we need to look at insurance on mom and dad now because we're talking about these things. This was a way, instead of going in as a risk manager with product sales, I'm going in with an overall comprehensive plan with my attorney that's helping me out, and I'm saying, hey, we're going to need to cover this possibility.
I think you're 100% correct. I mean, you know that my clients are affluent. My clients are physicians and business owners and executives and various kinds of professionals, and these are people who have good incomes. And in many cases, those people are income dependent to support their lifestyle. And so the way that I have an insurance conversation with my clients as an attorney, where I do ask about how much life insurance is in place on you, how much life insurance is in place on your spouse, do you have appropriate amounts of disability and long-term care insurance? And I make some of the wealthiest people in the United States buy that coverage. And the conventional wisdom that they have received from other advisors is, you're too rich to worry about that, or you're too successful to worry about it. So we've got a group of people who feel they can't afford long-term care and DI and life insurance. And then we've got another group of people who've been told they're too rich to worry about it. And then we have some imaginary group in the middle. I don't think that's correct. And I make some of the richest people in the country buy the same coverage that the middle-class people need.
We come back from the break in about 30 seconds. We're going to follow up on this because that, to me, is a huge issue and an opportunity. Back in the day, life insurance professionals were called field underwriters. Then, carriers trained their field force in the basics of life insurance underwriting. Today, the insurance industry doesn't educate the agent population as they once did. But now you can have the Informed Risk Guide at your fingertips so you can illustrate a reasonable rate class for your life insurance prospects. Just request your copy of the Informed Risk Guide at downtobusiness.ashbrokerage.com. It's free from Ash Brokerage, the practice enhancement company. Well, Ike, let's talk a little bit about this idea. When we talk about replacing assets, when we talk about replacing income especially, I've noticed that professionals and a lot of advisors, it seems to me to make some mistake. They put all the money on the physician and very little on the physician's wife. And something happens to the physician's wife with children, and now he has to figure out how much time can I spend at home taking care of these children and keeping my practice, and especially if I'm in a partnership, are my partners going to be okay with that?
That's absolutely correct. In fact, I wrote a couple articles specifically on this called How Physicians Can Stop Hating Life Insurance, Part 1 and Part 2. And in Part 1, we talk about how to use it in a tactical way. Part 2, we talked about how much is enough. Number one, what's the appropriate amount of death benefit for somebody with a high income? We talked about what is the appropriate amount on a either non-working or lower earning spouse. And the example that you happen to use, and we know that it works both ways for both men and women. It might be a successful female physician with a lower earning husband in another profession, or a stay-at-home dad. It could be either way. But what we find is that the earning spouse, in the example you use, let's say that it's Dr. John Smith. Well, Dr. Smith will have multiple millions of dollars in life insurance in place on him, hopefully. And typically what we'll see is that Mrs. Smith, who might be at home, a stay-at-home mom, might have the courtesy $250,000 that seems to be given to a lot of stay-at-home spouses just as a matter of routine so they don't feel left out. I'm not sure what the logic is. In fact, I'm not sure there's any logic to it. Because if I have a client who goes out and makes $500,000 or more, or some multiple of that every year, and he has a full-time spouse in your example who stays home and takes care of 3 children, I ask that client, if we lost her, how many hours a week are we going to be able to take away from your practice for you to devote to that care? And should there perhaps be some offset to help provide the level of care, the number of human hours it would take to make up for that horrible loss. And we don't certainly ever want to see a client in a position at a time where they're having such an emotional, deep personal thing to deal with, that we're adding financial pressure to it. That is the opposite of what we're supposed to be doing as both legal and financial advisors, right?
Well, when you talk about this, I mean, I'm looking at people say, well, I have kind of covered all this. I'm wondering how many times we should be reviewing what life events would trigger, and we should be reviewing things like this with our client, because I've seen every time we do a review, and especially when you're going down, instead of doing a traditional indemnification review, we're doing an actual document, a state or an asset protection review, looking at documents, thinking of what has changed, and those changes many times actually get us in front of the client for a product sale. And I'll end with this to ask you this question. We're talking about life insurance in a low interest rate environment. It isn't like it used to be. If you're making 5-6% on your death benefit, you may not have to touch the corpus or the original death benefit amount. Now we're down about a point or so. I mean, the number has to be a little bit bigger to cover those kind of expenditures and replace the income.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there are a number of events that we can talk about in detail. But if we're talking about, for instance, the advisors that deal with physician clients in particular, the changes that are being implemented this year in 2014 in compensation with Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, are really major game changers for my physician clients. You know that my partners and I work with a couple thousand doctors spread across every state in the country. And we are seeing their incomes being drastically affected. And we've seen many of these people take hits of up to 40% over the last 6 years. And a great deal of that is due to the compensation model imposed on them by the insurance companies. Which means that if we had a guy who maybe used to make $500,000 a year and has a financial plan that assumed that he was going to continue to earn that amount for the next 20 years, and here's how much that you'd carved off every month for retirement plan contributions, and here's how much was going to, their investment account and their savings and paying down the house and all of the other things that people plan so carefully for, you better get ready for a new reality, which is that income number may be a floating target, and we need to offset that exposure with the right amount and the right kinds of insurance.
I did not realize the impact was that great on some of these physicians where they're getting actually a reduction in pay now.
It's huge, Steve. It's really big, and it's across the board. It's not just in the traditional MD arena. We've seen it affect dentists and everybody else as well.
Well, that's our show for today. Remember, before moving forward with any of the ideas you hear on our show, always consult your tax advisor, your legal counsel, or your broker-dealer compliance officer. And don't forget, you can view all our past episodes at downtobusiness.ashbrokerage.com. And remember, you could be wiser as an Ash Brokerage advisor. We'll see you tomorrow.